that is, reasserting our original position instead of supplying additional support, when we engage in special pleading, or when we are guilty of the fallacy of the complex question, that is, argue a different issue. For an example of the latter, consider someone who says, "Okay, let's discuss national defense. Shall we spend more on missiles or shall we spend more on conventional forces?" The original question might be whether we should spend more or less, or the same, but the reply assumes that we have already agreed to spend more. We distort facts in our assumptions when we use false and misleading analogies. Register all matches and prevent forest fires. When we identify false causes, for example, all wars in the 20th century fought by the United States have been under democratic administrations, or when we propose an irrelevant thesis as a red herring to be discussed below. Refutation of pity appeals. The appeal to pity, like the appeals to authority, ad populum, and precedence, is largely an attempt to gain the sympathy of the audience. If any of these appeals has been successful, then it is important to realize that the audience has a certain sympathy for that kind of argument. Hence, the refutation follows one of two patterns. Either we invoke a higher order appeal of the same nature, or we attempt to turn the tables. If your opponent has appealed to pity, then you should act as if his example of pity is a general premise. Then add some premise of your own that you think would be accepted by the audience and derive a conclusion which is inconsistent with that of your opponent. For example, suppose your opponent has argued that we should destroy all atomic weapons and has begun his argument with a detailed survey of the consequences of Hiroshima. Further, we suppose the appeal to pity to have been an effective one. The audience obviously feels pity for those who suffer. The only way to counteract this appeal is to point out that if America had not possessed or used atomic weapons on Japan, as your opponent argues, and if the war had had to be concluded by an invasion of the Japanese islands, then, adding the supplementary premise, by the best estimates, the casualties on both sides, including military and civilian, would have been astronomical. Now add, how many Japanese and American children and their parents are alive because of that courageous decision to drop the bomb? The use of atomic weapons actually minimized suffering. As a second example, imagine a lawyer defending a juvenile by claiming that because his client is a child, therefore we ought to make allowances. The appeal to pity has the following structure: because of X, therefore Y. We turn the tables by deriving a different conclusion from the same premise. Because of X, therefore not Y. Because he is a child, we ought not to make allowances. Otherwise, we shall be establishing or encouraging a bad habit. The refutation of authority. There are two ways of undermining your opponent's use of authority, either by an ad hominem attack on his specific authorities or by providing counter-authorities. Further, there are at least 6 different kinds of ad hominem attacks upon an authority. First, if a man is quoted as an authority and at the same time is known to have opinions that are inconsistent with the appeals to pity, ad populum, or precedent used by your opponent, then you should pounce upon this inconsistency. Second, if the alleged expert belongs to a group or espouses a cause to which you know the audience is opposed or hostile, then undermine the authority by the use of guilt by association. Third, an expert may be undermined by pointing out the distinction between theory and practice. Lots of things sound great in theory, such as how the computer is here to save us, and there are complete flops in practice. For example, in trying to obtain public support for a space program, many experts were called upon to tell of the benefits of the research that goes on in such a program. Some of these benefits have not actually taken place. Many were based upon theoretical presuppositions that could easily be attacked. Moreover, in dealing with human problems, we are usually flooded with imbecilic theories about their solutions, and we all know how many of these proposed solutions have failed. Finally, we all know that the experts produced by our opponent are people who live in ivory towers. That is, they teach at colleges or universities, far removed from reality. Fourth, any authority who deals with extreme abstractions can be undermined by stressing the distinction between theory and practice. The public is frequently unaware of this distinction, since the press indiscriminately reports all scientific statements as if they were facts. Many of them are purely theoretical. For example, can anyone, no matter how intelligent, really explain the beginning of the universe. If there were a beginning, then something must have preceded it. All theories rely upon some pre-existing event or thing or state, like an expanding gas. This is not literally a beginning of the universe, if something was already there. Besides, could we ever check such an event? Moreover, the history of science abounds with great scientists who believed false, if not idiotic, things. Galileo, for example, wanted to explain tides in terms of the sun. This is a little difficult to work out, especially with tides at night. Fifth, as a last-ditch tactic against any expert, you should engage in a general attack on all expertise. Here you can discount or dismiss an expert's knowledge by appealing to a more general truth. Suppose you are dealing with an alleged medical expert whose testimony is not to your liking. You may point out that knowledge in general is highly uncertain. And if knowledge in general is uncertain, then surely some particular kind of alleged knowledge, even medical knowledge, is uncertain. Finally, you might even hint at the fact that there is a conspiracy among all of your opponent's experts, especially if they agree. The other general form of attack against expertise and authority is to provide counter-experts. There are two possibilities here as well. First, if you feel that you have been successful in undermining the audience's confidence in your opponent's experts, then introduce your own experts who will support your case. Second, if you have used the fifth method outlined previously, a general critique of all authority and expertise, then introduce counter-experts, not necessarily as supporters for your case, but simply for effect. Surely, if all of these experts disagree, what is the use of using experts at all? Ridicule is the final weapon here. For example, I suggest that you consult any discussion among experts on how to raise children. One might do well to recall here William F. Buckley's quip about professors, when he said that he would rather be governed by the first 100 names in the Boston Telephone Directory than the faculty of Harvard University. Refutation ad populum. Ad populum appeals, by their very nature, are very popular. The major ploy against them is to invoke another ad populum that supports your case, or goes against the case of your opponent, one that you think might have an even greater appeal. For example, in redistricting or in choosing candidates, it is frequently suggested that minority groups be placed into a stronghold or given a candidate with the same cultural background in order to guarantee them some kind of representation. This seems to be consistent with a democratic attempt to do justice to all legitimate interest groups within the society, and is thus an ad populum appeal. To counter it, you might point out that such a system gives the minority a voice but little power, since any one representative may be ignored. There is a second way of attacking your opponent's use of the ad populum appeal. This way is to be used only if you cannot think of an effective counter ad populum. What you must then do is engage in a general attack on ad populum appeals. You must point out to your audience the extent to which what most people is often wrong. You can drive this point home by giving examples, such as the fact that many people once believed that the earth was flat, and surely the majority opinion here was wrong. In the realm of values, which is more appropriate to the ad populum appeal, we may note that the charging of interest, usury, was once frowned upon, whereas today a vibrant economy is impossible without a credit system that depends upon charging interest. The refutation of precedent. The obvious refutation of an appeal to precedent is to invoke a counter-precedent. For example, in the Supreme Court case of Keswick versus Buick in 1937, we discovered that Mr. Keswick was injured and disabled by an accident he suffered because of his recently published Buick automobile. It was later substantiated that the Buick was defective. Mr. Keswick sued. In its defense, the Buick lawyers argued that they should not be held responsible for the defective Buick on the grounds that such liability would economically undermine Buick in particular and the whole economy in general. Here the precedent is the security of the free enterprise system. Mr. Keswick's lawyers argued that his disability prevented him from earning a living and thereby from supporting his family. Here the counter-precedent is the preservation of the institution of the family. Mr. Keswick won. The second way of attacking a precedent is to show that it does not apply to the case at hand because of the presence of extenuating circumstances or significant differences. Let us imagine a shipwreck and the survivors on a lifeboat far off the beaten path. Further, there are too many survivors for the small lifeboat. And in addition, there is a storm coming up.